Interstate 85, the main highway of the South. While Interstate 95 is the big dog in Virginia and points north, and again in Florida, it is Interstate 85 that takes the reins in the heart of the South, connecting all three of North Carolina's top metro areas, South Carolina's upstate, the unofficial capital of the South, Atlanta, as well as one of the most southern of southern cities, Montgomery, Alabama. So what is it like to drive on the South's main highway? Well, I have traveled on this one more times than I can count, especially the portion between Atlanta and Durham. And on this video, I'm going to tell you what you can expect when you travel on Interstate 85. But before we get into that portion, let's talk about the history of I-85. Now, like the other interstates we've discussed thus far, Interstate 85 is for the most part a roadway that did not exist at all prior to the interstate highway system, at least as a freeway. Interstate 85 was one of the originally planned interstates. Its planned route from day one back in 1957 was the current route from Montgomery to Petersburg, Virginia. The northern half of the route from Petersburg to Catawba Indian Territory. The northern half of the route from Petersburg to Catawba Indian Territory, which is today roughly the Augusta area, followed an ancient Indian path. Virginia actually had the only pre-interstate section of I-85, which was the southern end of the Richmond-Petersburg Turnpike. This section of 85 was built with revenue from toll bonds and did not use any federal funds, and the tolls were actually removed in 1992. Former overhead signs in the area also used to help northerners figure out which part of the South they wanted to go to, as the I-95 section was signed for Miami and I-85 for Atlanta. As of today, this overhead sign has been removed for some reason. In North Carolina, there weren't any turnpikes or other full-scale toll routes, but the state had already begun designing or building bypass routes around some of its cities. Some of those, such as the Lexington bypass, did eventually become part of an interstate. One significant portion of I-85 in North Carolina is the long concurrency with I-40 between Greensboro and Durham. This section actually was only planned to be I-85, as I-40 originally terminated at I-85 in Greensboro. It was later extended to Raleigh, which was originally left out of the interstate highway system altogether, and later it went to Wilmington. In recent decades, North Carolina moved I-85 from its route into Greensboro and placed it onto a new bypass south of the city. This helped alleviate pressure on the dangerous interchange with I-40 that ran through the city and became known as Death Valley. Also of note is the former I-85 Business or I-85 Green route. This was the old temporary path of I-85 while the current portion was being constructed. It was then decommissioned altogether in 2019, and as of 2023, no more signage for the old Green 85 can be found. The first section of I-85 built in North Carolina with federal money was the Charlotte bypass in 1958. This route was also known as the US 29 bypass, as that is the route that I-85 was to eventually replace in the area. Once the money was in place, North Carolina got to work quickly with the entire route through the state completed by January 1972. In South Carolina, I-85 was also to follow the US 29 corridor, with the first section opened in 1959, which followed a newly widened portion of US 29 from Spartanburg to the North Carolina state line. South Carolina also made haste in completing Interstate 85, with the highway fully opened in the state by 1967, making it the first interstate to be completed by South Carolina. In Georgia, one thing you'll notice is that I-85 does not follow along US 29 to Athens before Atlanta. Instead, it travels on a more northern path. This was not the original plan, as the highway was indeed supposed to travel to Athens and connect the University of Georgia with Atlanta. However, then Governor Ernest Vandiver changed the route to travel through his home county of Franklin. So as you can see, I-85 misses both Gainesville and Athens and instead travels in between them. Just goes to show the power of governors when it comes to infrastructure. Much of the route in the Atlanta area was already completed in the 1950s as a 4 to 6 lane expressway, while the section between LaGrange and Newton was not done until 1977. And in Alabama, it was no surprise that the state's chosen path for I-85 in Montgomery involved race. Initially planned to pass south of the city, I-85 was eventually chosen instead to run through the city's wealthiest black neighborhood at the height of the civil rights movement in the area. Gotta love Alabama, eh? Now that we know a little history of the route, what is it like to drive on I-85? Well, I like to go south to north, so we'll kick it right off here in Montgomery, Alabama, the heart of the South. In Montgomery, I-85 begins at an interchange with I-65 and Day Street. The control city position is already occupied by Atlanta, as the route doesn't pass through any other places worthy of being control cities between here and there. One thing you have to credit the Deep South for is the well-chosen control cities. This is the controversial section of the roadway mentioned earlier in the video. It is also called the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Expressway, and from a road standpoint, it is high quality. Of note, east of Montgomery is the interchange with Alabama 108. Right now, it just looks like a short stub route, but this route is actually planned to eventually become an outer loop around the city and will likely get an interstate designation. I-85 is also planned to be eventually extended from Montgomery over into neighboring Mississippi. And these will all be done once the state can find the money for it, of course. Heading out of Montgomery, you pass by Tuskegee, where you can check out the Tuskegee Airmen History Site. Then there's Auburn, home of the major university of the same name. Outside of this area, you're going to see trees. Lots of trees. The greenery might be a shock to some of my folks in the western U.S. And once you cross the Chattahoochee, you're in Georgia, the Peach State. Immediately upon entering Georgia, you won't notice much of a difference from Alabama. Outside of the Atlanta area, they look quite similar, actually. The first major town you pass is LaGrange, and shortly after that, we encounter one of the longer auxiliary interstates in Interstate 185, which takes you down to Columbus and Fort Benning. After that, it's all quiet in rural Georgia as we are on a standard 4-lane freeway. In the Noonan area, the highway expands to 6 lanes. At this point, we are actually already in the Atlanta metro area. Yep. It reaches that far south. And north of Noonan, the roadway again opens up to a whopping 8 lanes. I wouldn't even be surprised if Georgia eventually gets I-85 to 3 lanes or more throughout the entire state in the near future. Then we cross exit 56 for Collinsworth Road and enter Fulton County, the home county of Atlanta. Now, Atlanta and traffic go hand in hand as they are practically like peanut butter and jelly. And to no surprise, more and more cars just seemingly start to appear out of nowhere as you head towards the city. As soon as we cross into the city of College Park, we encounter a gigantic interchange with I-285, the Perimeter Highway. This is an auxiliary route of I-85 that forms a beltway around Atlanta. I-85 kind of weaves in with 285 here, with the highway traveling between the two directions of 285. In this area, we also pass next to the Atlanta Hartsfield International Airport. Not only is it the busiest in the United States, but also the entire world. It's like its own little city in there. After the airport, we surprisingly drop down to 3 lanes on each side. But not to worry, you will soon be driving on one of the widest freeways in America. Signage for I-75 to Atlanta appears, and before you know it, we are joining in with this other major interstate highway. Boom! 12 to 14 lanes across. This super wide freeway is known as the Downtown Connector and is infamous for its large number of general purpose lanes and traffic congestion. As we head north, behold the spectacular view of the Atlanta skyline approaching the interchange with I-20. On the Downtown Connector, we have a rare situation where 2 major interstates ending in 5 or 0 were routed through the downtown area of major city together. Now, we're talking about things from a novelty, engineering, and views perspective. There's a lot to love about this drive. You simply don't experience this type of urban driving in most places. However, a good lesson was learned about traffic flow in urban areas. The Downtown Connector demonstrates that when possible, it is better to have multiple smaller roadways to disperse traffic than one gigantic roadway to funnel all of the traffic into. I'd argue that a 6-lane Downtown Connector and a 6-lane Georgia 400 would have been more effective than the 14-lane Downtown Connector. In this area, we'll pass by buildings such as Georgia Power, the state capitol, and Georgia Tech. And then finally, I-75 departs to continue due north while I-85 takes a northeastern turn. Our next major exit is for Georgia 400, which can take you to Atlanta's Buckhead neighborhood and other suburbs north of Atlanta. An express lane is available here for a fee if you want to bypass traffic. At our second encounter with I-285, we have this massive interchange commonly known as Spaghetti Junction. The Atlanta area definitely has the most impressive stack interchanges in the South outside of Texas. After this point, we are in the Atlanta suburbs of Gwinnett County. And I-85 has 5 general purpose lanes and an express lane. In this area, we can see the 2 compromised freeways that were eventually built by Georgia to make up for I-85 bypassing Athens. Interstate 985 takes you to Gainesville, while Georgia 316 runs to Athens. And after Interstate 985, we are down to 6 general purpose lanes with an express lane in the middle. Hamilton Mill Road marks the interchange where we finally revert back to a 4-lane rural freeway. But not to worry, the wider 85 keeps creeping further and further north as more and more people keep moving to the Atlanta area and its sprawl reaches across a vast amount of territory. There are no major cities along I-85 in this part of Georgia, and our control city is now Greenville, South Carolina. And after passing small towns such as Carnesville and Livonia, we cross the state line. Crossing into South Carolina, we cross Lake Hartwell, a man-made lake that marks the start of the Savannah River. Interstate 85 is one of the few interstates that when you cross into South Carolina, there isn't a noticeable drop in quality. You know it's an important roadway when even South Carolina spent the money to keep it in good condition. I-85 bypasses Anderson, but that city can be accessed with US 29, and Clemson can be accessed with US 76. I-85 expands to 6 lanes this far south, and US 29 joins us in the approach to Greenville. Just outside of Greenville's borders, we encounter Interstate 185, the most useless toll road in America. The section into the city works just fine and is toll-free, while the toll portion takes you on an out-of-the-way journey around Greenville suburbs and even has cash toll booths to make it even slower. Greenville, South Carolina has a city population of only 70,000, yet it actually is the largest metro area in the state at 928,000 people. A good example of why city populations are useless for telling you how large an area is. South Carolina's restrictive annexation laws make its cities appear much smaller on paper than they actually are in reality. So if you hop off of 85 and take a stroll into town, you'll be surprised to see a pretty lively downtown area. The major interchange in Greenville is with Interstate 385. This is a longer spur route that runs southeast to meet I-26 towards Columbia, or you can take the other direction and head into downtown. The I-85 corridor in South Carolina is known as the upstate area and has gotten very popular as a location for large companies relocating to. BMW is noted for its manufacturing facility in the South Carolina upstate. The other city of the upstate will appear as a control city once you're in the upstate, and that is Spartanburg. Now, Spartanburg isn't as large as Greenville, but of note here is the interchange with Interstate 26 and the I-85 business loop. There's also an interstate orphan here known as I-585. I-585 was orphaned when I-85 was moved from the business loop to its current routing further from the city. Between Spartanburg and the North Carolina state line, this section of 85 used to be the most painful portion of the trip between Atlanta and Charlotte. But South Carolina has been working hard to upgrade it to 6 lanes in recent years, and the project is almost completed. It's amazing how fast these roads can be upgraded when there are big businesses located along the route. In this area, Interstate 85 bypasses most of the small towns, and US 29 hangs around if you want to check those out. Then we cross into North Carolina, where we actually lose a lane and drop back to 4. US 29 rejoins temporarily and departs again with US 74 at this complicated interchange in Kings Mountain. In Gaston County, I-85 functions as the bypass route, while US 29 travels through the city. Gaston County is part of the Charlotte metro area, and you can tell as the 6-lane I-85 is heavily traveled here. With I-85 being the most important highway in the state, it is 6 lanes or more from this point all the way to Durham. North Carolina is currently planning to widen this section starting early next year. Once we cross the Catawba, we are in Mecklenburg County, the home of Charlotte, and the roadway expands to 8 lanes. You'll see a big relief in congestion in this part compared to the Gaston County portion. Like Atlanta, I-85 has a Beltway auxiliary route in Charlotte. Here it is I-485, and also like Atlanta, the southern interchange with the Beltway, and I-85 is the location of the airport. Charlotte really is baby Atlanta, huh? And as we discussed earlier in the video, I-85 was built as a bypass of the then developed portion of Charlotte, while US 29 travels towards the core of the city. Before leaving the airport area, we encounter Billy Graham Parkway, a limited access highway that forms part of a loop around Charlotte known as Charlotte 4. The only such occurrence of a city having its own numbered highway. Of course, Charlotte is the only city that is so in love with itself that it created its own highway. Loop 4 isn't signed from the interstate, so you won't see signage for it unless you're actually driving on it. Going northbound, the interchange with North Carolina 16 or Brookshire Boulevard is signed for downtown Charlotte. And next we encounter I-77, another north-south interstate. This one travels south next to downtown Charlotte, or can take you north to the popular Lake Norman area. I-85 in Mecklenburg County is a pretty smooth drive despite the crazy growth of the Charlotte area. North Carolina really planned well with this one, which is the opposite of I-77, which has the busiest section of roadway in the state between downtown and the South Carolina state line, yet only has 6 lanes of capacity. After the I-77 interchange, we have Sugar Creek Road, which you can find some interesting activities occurring out there late at night. And then there's the University City area. This part of Charlotte contains the University of North Carolina at Charlotte and is mostly suburban in character. Charlotte also extended their Blue Line light rail to generally parallel Interstate 85 up here. Up next is the northern interchange with I-485. This was actually originally planned to be a large stack interchange and would have been the largest in North Carolina. But the state ultimately went with this turbine design that was significantly cheaper due to less bridges being required. I was actually able to drive this interchange and the final section of 485 when it opened back in 2015. Yep, I'm totally into that kind of stuff, and it's always awesome to be able to check out a new piece of major infrastructure as soon as it opens. After 485, we enter Cabarrus County and Concord, where we have Concord Mills Mall. This mall is actually the busiest tourist attraction in all of North Carolina. It's a smooth 8-lane drive these days, but you should have seen how horrible the traffic was getting out here when 85 was just 4 lanes not too long ago. North Carolina did a really good job of fixing that bottleneck with how they kept the auxiliary lanes from I-485 all the way north to the Concord Mills interchange. Even after leaving Charlotte proper, I-85 maintains 8 lanes of travel far north of here. It lasts all the way through Concord, Kannapolis, and Salisbury, and doesn't drop back to 6 lanes until Lexington, where I-285 departs for Winston-Salem. While on 85, we are headed to Greensboro. Near Archdale, you'll encounter Interstate 74. This is one of those interstates that North Carolina is gung-ho about, but as of now, no other states have bothered to construct any of this I-74 extension that theoretically is to reach the existing portion in the Midwest. In Greensboro, the first thing you encounter is the Greensboro Urban Loop. The old I-85 route into the city is now US 29 and US 70, while I-85 bypasses the city on the loop. Also here is Interstate 73, which technically has a very short wrong-way concurrency with I-85, but the two interstates never actually share the same roadway, with I-85 instead weaving between the path of I-73. The Greensboro-Winston-Salem area has the highest density of freeways in North Carolina, and as such has the lightest traffic of its major metro areas. It's always a breeze driving through here, despite it being the route that connects Charlotte and the Triangle. On the eastern side of the loop, I-85 is joined by I-40, and I-785 and I-840 are signed for Danville, Virginia, if you continue north. Once joined by I-40, we are on a lengthy concurrency of 2 major interstates. North Carolina blew this portion out from 4 to 8 lanes back in the 90s and demolished and rebuilt every single bridge. Here, over 30 years later, it still flows well, despite all the growth in North Carolina. Leave it to North Carolina to defeat induced demand, eh? Outside the town of Hillsborough, we see signage for the coming split with I-40 heading to Raleigh and I-85 to Durham. At this point, we are officially in the Raleigh-Durham Triangle area, the second largest metro in North Carolina and home of Research Triangle Park. Most of the lanes will go with I-85, but don't be fooled. Soon after I-40's departure, we drop back to 4 lanes as well. Entering Durham, we do again get those 8 lanes, and you cross the Durham Freeway, which can be used to hop on to US 15501 for Duke University. Or you can continue further down that road for the Superior, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. If you're not seeing the pattern yet, North Carolina has very well-built urban freeways, and I-85 is a smooth trip through Durham as well. Then there is yet another auxiliary route, Interstate 885, which along with I-85 and the Durham Freeway, form a sort of beltway around Durham now. After Durham, the action on I-85 in North Carolina finally dies down, and we're back to 4 lanes for the first time since Kings Mountain. Our next control city is Petersburg, Virginia, but you do pass by small towns like Oxford and Henderson along the way. In Henderson, we encounter US 1, which connects with Raleigh to form the connection between Raleigh and the Petersburg, Richmond areas of Virginia. The rest of the trip in North Carolina is pretty quiet, so let's talk about Virginia. Now in Virginia, it's also quiet, almost too quiet. This stretch of I-85 is noted for its tall trees on both sides of the roadway and in the median, which is notorious for all of the access drives built in the median for state troopers to hide out in. With this type of cover, it's difficult to spot them until it's too late, so watch your speed. This section is also pretty painful to drive at night, and it has seemingly endless miles of identical scenery. Tunnel vision can set in if you're even somewhat fatigued. After perhaps the most painful 60-mile stretch of interstate in Virginia, we finally reach the Petersburg area, and the roadway offers some different scenery. This section in Petersburg was formerly a part of the Richmond-Petersburg Turnpike. You'll see overhead signs for I-95 and US 40 to Rocky Mount in Norfolk, while I-95 North takes you to Richmond. And what remains of I-85 drops down to 1 lane and merges into I-95 en route to Richmond. There is no end sign for I-85, but this marks the end point of this major interstate, and we are now on I-95, headed for Richmond, DC, Baltimore, New York, and Boston. Alright guys, that is it for Interstate 85. So now back to the original question posed by the video. Why is Interstate 85 the most important in the South? When it comes to the South, Interstate 85 just hits more of the significant areas of the South than any other interstate. Outside of the Texas and Florida metros, it's covering the most prominent areas. Maybe only Nashville is left out. Whereas as we discussed with 95, you're only hitting Florida in the South. And if you talk about Interstate 10, you're really only hitting Jacksonville, Houston, and San Antonio. So all things considered, Interstate 85 is the main highway of the South. And that is all for today. Thanks for watching as always, and I will see you on the next one.